If your improv solos sound like scale exercises, then most likely they probably are. And no matter how many hours you practice, you're never going to sound like a true professional jazz pianist unless you break out of this scale only improv trap. Welcome to the Jazz Piano School podcast. My name is Brendan Lowe, and if you've ever felt stuck trying to learn jazz piano from a million different sources, this show is definitely for you. Each week, I break things down step by step to help you play with more freedom, more confidence, and a whole lot more swing. Everything I share here ties back to the system that I created and that we use inside the Jazz Piano School membership. So if you're ready for more structure and progress, I'll tell you how to check that out at the end of this episode. And hey, if you're enjoying this kind of real-world guidance, make sure to hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Okay, welcome to the Jazz Piano School podcast, episode number 365. This is going to be a good one. I'm super excited for this. You know, when I was younger, learning jazz piano, I did this. As I got older and I started teaching, my students did this. As they got older and they started teaching, their students did this. This is literally one of the most common issues that jazz pianists, and you have probably run up to when learning jazz, because all the jazz education teaches you, a lot of it is modes and scales. And I get this question so much. Brendan, how do we make scales sound like jazz? How do we make scales sound like jazz? How do we turn scales into jazz? Right? Have you ever asked yourself that question? Scales are just tools. They're just tools, right? They're not sentences and they're not poetry. And if all you do is run up and down the scales, you're not really speaking the language of music. You're just kind of like listing ingredients. It's just like reading an ingredient label, right? So we really need to utilize the tool in a specific way. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to do. Now, it's more than that. There's a couple different components. I'm going to be talking about 3 different components that you find in bebop that you have to use in order to create a bebop line. I'm going to be talking about other points that help in the blues, because some of the points that you use over bebop aren't going to work for you over the blues. And there's certain approaches and strategies that you want to use over the blues and not bebop. And I'm going to be focusing on those 2 categories. Modern improv language is the last category. I'm not going to focus on that today. But when you listen to this podcast and implement the tools and approaches that I'm going to show you, you'll instantly break out of this trap forever. Now, it does require practice, right? And really slow your practice down to focus in on each individual element that I'm talking to you. Like, even though this episode, it's short, I wouldn't say that short. I mean, it's about 20 minutes long, but it's packed. So every single thing I say, don't just breeze over it. Like, take each individual item, and I'd say work on each individual item for like a week or 2. Okay, in the end, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of actionable practice items to do as well to help you know exactly how to take the information in here and put it into action. Sound good? The last point I want to leave you with, that I'm going to say in the podcast anyway, though, is that scales are important. They are really, really important. They kind of get a bad rap. Modes get a bad rap, scales get a bad rap. But they are actually very important. I'm going to tell you why in the beginning of this podcast. All right. So I'm super excited for this one. I got a lot of good feedback on the last podcast. I am changing a couple things up. If you've been a common listener, no. If you've been a long-time listener, there we go. You'll notice I'm changing a couple things up in the podcast. Hopefully you enjoy the changes. If you're a new listener, then, well, hopefully you just enjoy the podcast. But with that being said, let's dive right in. Here we go. All right, how do we break out of the scales-only improv, right? If you're just running up and down scales, that's really not going to be the best thing to create a professional improvisational sound. Now, I want to start out by teaching you that there are 3 improvisational categories that you can really start to focus on: bebop, blues, and modern language. bebop, blues, and modern language. Today, I'm going to be focusing mainly on bebop and blues. So scales in jazz, they do serve a really important purpose. And I want to outline this first just so you understand what scales do and why we use them. So in a chord, if we're working on this D minor 7, for example, we have 4 chord tones. Chord tones are really essential to reflecting the sound of the chord, meaning these notes make up the chord. So it makes sense if I were to solo using these notes, I'm going to reflect the sound of the chord because I'm playing the notes that make up the chord, right? Sounds pretty obvious. Right? So everything I'm doing is improv with these 4 notes, and it's sounding like a D minor 7 because I'm using those 4 notes. If I go to a G7 here, it's going to sound like G7 because I'm using the 4 chord tones, and finally C major 7. Now, to intermediate and advanced players, a lot of you are like, yeah, I get it, right? But this is very important. It's really, really important because so many students tend to even miss these basic concepts in their improvisation, and this leads to a lot of weird sounds, strange things that don't sound like professional jazz improvisation. So, one of our goals is to land on these chord tones when I'm playing through a progression in jazz, like a 2-5-1. So when I switch from a D minor 7 to a G7, I'm going to land on the new chord tones for the new chord. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. I just landed on that third. 1 and 2 and 4 and 1. Then I landed on that third again, right? Now, if I were to only solo with chord tones, what is that going to sound like? It's going to sound pretty broken and segmented. And why is that? Well, because first of all, I'm only using 4 notes, and it's going to sound like a lot of skipping, right? Skipping back and forth because a lot of these are just placed a third apart. So for jazz and creating smooth, elegant lines, just playing chord tones isn't going to do it, and that's why we need scales. So don't get me wrong. Scales and fluidity in our lines are very important. Now check this out. If I start to play a line now and connect the chord tones using a mode or a scale, check out how it sounds. Now that sounds pretty good compared to what I was just playing, am I right? So scales, my point being, scales do have a really strong place in jazz improvisation, but if you're just playing scales, that's where you're going to need a little bit of help. Okay, now here are the 3 components to make up essentially what I call a bebop equation. Now a bebop equation is going to be comprised of these 3 components: skips, steps, and a bebop approach or an enclosure. All right, or approach note, whatever you want to call it. So skips, steps, and a bebop approach note. So let's talk about our skips. Our skips in jazz are mainly comprised of 4 notes. So if I were to do a skip pattern, okay, I would go up maybe 1, 3, 5, 7. That's a very common skip pattern in jazz improv. Right, so I've gone up in my skips now, and usually what happens in jazz, again, this is kind of like a systematic equation you can use. Once a player or an artist has done 4 skips, they usually move into steps at that point. Right, so I'm going up skips and then down in steps. Now my steps are essentially a part of the scale, right? But it's only a portion of the scale. Right? I can do another skip pattern starting on 3, 5, 7, 9. So I can go 3, 5, 7, 9 and come down. Right? I can do 5, 7, 9, 11. And I can do 7, 9, 11, 13. Now those are the 4 most common skip patterns over a minor 7 chord, right? So if I do some skips, that particular line right there was comprised of those 3 elements: a skip pattern, and then some steps there. So I went up to this E, I came down in steps, and then I added a bebop approach or an enclosure to get me into the third of my G7 chord. See that? Now, when I land on this new chord tone, I now have the ability or choice to use more skips or use more steps. So I can totally start to use steps first, and then I can move into my skips if I want. So I chose to use steps first. I went from the third of the G7, I went down in steps. And then I did a skip pattern, 1, 3, 5, 7 from the G7. And then again, we always want to use an enclosure, our bebop approach, to get us into the next chord, into landing on the next chord tone. So, right, so this is chord scale above, chord scale below, half step below into our third. So here's my full line, right? I'm going. See that? Now that's incredible. Like I literally just built a random bebop line that sounds absolutely amazing from scratch using this systematic process, which combined 3 elements that I just taught you: skips, steps, and the bebop approach. Now, if you're using these 3 elements in your playing, in your improv at all times, right, that's going to totally break you out of the element of just playing scales. Now, the key here is that, again, anytime we move into a new chord, we want to use a bebop approach. So we might use chord scale above to half step below. But in the middle of the measure, like I just demonstrated, we want to use a combination of skips and steps. Skips and steps. And it can be in either way. You can do steps into skips or skips into steps. It doesn't matter. So that's one of the first things that you can really start to do to break yourself out of the just playing scales kind of thing over bebop lines, right? Now, if you're playing the blues, that formula doesn't really apply because the blues is more about blues scale notes, right? Which leads me to my next teaching segment of this particular podcast. There's essentially a couple things you really need to keep in mind. Motivic development is going to be a big one, and this is going to cover the blues, but also bebop as well. We need to have some contour, some storytelling in our solo, right? And we can do that through repetitive ideas and small melodic or rhythmic phrasing, right? This is going to create a story and create cohesion and kind of a thread that ties everything together. So in the blues, check it out. A lot of students will start by doing this. Just running up and down the scale. Right? Clearly, that's just going up and down the scale. So what do we need to do? We need to create small 3 to 4 notes ideas or groupings of notes, maybe even smaller, 2 to 3, and create repetitive ideas around that. These can be melodic ideas or rhythmic ideas, meaning if I play some sort of rhythm that might be like 1 and 2 and 3, let's say that's my idea, 1 and 2 and 3. That's my rhythmic idea. What I'm going to do is repeat that idea, keep the rhythm, but I can change the notes now, but keep the rhythm, right? So the rhythm is going to be the single thread that holds everything together. Here it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4. So on that one, I went 1 and 2 and 3. I changed all 3 notes completely, which is okay because I still had the rhythm intact. So I took a single rhythmic concept, repeated it, but changed melodic notes around the rhythm. Now we can do an opposite. We can kind of take a melody or some sort of contour, like maybe a shape that goes up. And then I can take that 3-note shape and then bring it down to maybe C and go, right? So the shape I'm using is this kind of an upward motion of 3 notes. Right? So now I'm playing around with kind of melodies. So this is really what you want to focus on when you're trying to break out of these scales, especially for the blues, because there's no, when you're playing the blues, you're not really playing bebop, you're playing blues language. So this has to be done to create some sort of contour and texture in your blues solo.
Quick break right now. If you're finding this helpful and want a clear step-by-step path to build your jazz piano schools, I've got just the thing for you.
Right now, you can join the Jazz Piano School membership for just $37 a month. Now, that's 50% off our regular public price of $67 a month. You'll get full access to all of our courses, live coaching, a supportive community, and the full proficient jazz pianist system to guide your growth. Head on over to jazzpianoschool.com/discount 37, or just click the link in the show notes to grab the discount while it's still active. Now, rhythm, of course, is going to be one of my last topics for today. And essentially with rhythm, we have to have good rhythm. We have to be emphasizing lots of different types of rhythms, the upbeats, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. We have to be emphasizing downbeats or downbeats and upbeats or upbeats and downbeats. We have to be doing triplets, quarter note triplets, eighth notes and quarter notes, long, short, all of these different types of rhythms. And that's when you really start to get a great sound, right? So I'm going to play around with a bunch of rhythms here. So lots of rhythms. You have to record yourself and assess and listen back. Am I adding triplets? Am I adding quarter notes? Am I adding eighth notes? Am I adding 16th notes, right? And you can really isolate all the different rhythms in your practice and start to work on them individually to make sure that you're really integrating them successfully into your rhythmic vocabulary so that you can really expand all your rhythms. Now, the other thing is the pocket. If you focus on your pocket, whether it's in bebop or the blues, like even if I'm playing bebop over a 2-5-1, right? You have to have that swing feel. It's got to feel good. It's got to be swinging. And even if you just do it with a couple notes, right? So I'm just playing an octave, 1 and, but I'm really making sure that octave's grooving, locked in, and right in the pocket, okay? So essentially, here are some actual activities and homework for you to do to take away from this podcast. What you can do is you can just transcribe one chorus from any real player that you want, Miles Davis, Wynton Kelly, Red Garland, and kind of just analyze what tools are they using, the enclosures, the guide tones, and check out the rhythms that they're using as well, right? How are they breaking out of the scales? What types of skips are they doing? What types of steps? When do they use a bebop enclosure, right? Then you can rebuild the line, like any sort of lines that you see that they're using, maybe a 1-bar phrase or a 2-bar phrase. You can kind of rebuild those or switch things around, but make it your own. So this way you're kind of integrating a process where you're taking the Lego building blocks they use and you're adding them into your own repertoire. And then finally, you can improvise new phrases using approach notes and rhythms that they use. So if you find an approach or kind of like a rhythm that they use that you like, just replicate it. Let's say Wynton Kelly does this. Let's say you love this bebop approach and you're noticing that he does it a lot. Use that bebop approach. Practice it to the thirds. Right? And start to use it as much as possible. Or if there's a rhythm that they play that you like that might go, maybe that's a full rhythmic phrase you can practice and start to use. So by kind of like analyzing transcriptions and with the knowledge that I just gave you, you can really start to break out of these scales super, super fast in an easy way. And last but not least, record yourself. Record yourself and listen back and see, okay, am I using what Brendan said about the bebop approach notes, the skips, the steps? Am I using any of the transcribed rhythms that I did? Am I trying to add motifs? Am I not? right? Am I just playing up and down scales? So your practice should be really focused in on any of those concepts at any given time. Don't do everything at once, right? If you're working on the blues, work on blues rhythmic motifs for a week. Maybe you're just doing rhythms for a week. Right? Boo-dee-da-dee-da. That's the rhythm. Boo-dee-ba-dee-da. You can use any notes you want, but you got to use that rhythm. Ba-dee-da-dee-da. Okay, so I promise you, when you start to do this, you're gonna break out of your scale so fast. Your playing's gonna sound absolutely amazing, and you're gonna make progress really, really fast if you just hone in on the knowledge that I gave you today and some of these exercises. I'll talk to you soon, and enjoy.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope today's episode helped bring you some clarity or even inspiration for your playing. If you want a clear path to move forward based on your personal jazz goals, I put together a free resource called the Jazz Piano School Flowchart. It maps out the 3 most common goals jazz pianists pursue: how to play in a band, comping, solo piano, and improvisation. And it shows you exactly what to work on to get there. You can grab it now for free by going to jazzpianoschool.com/flowchart, or just click the link in the show notes. I'll catch you in the next episode, and as always, happy practicing.